I told her everything, start to finish. The touches, the assault, Mom not believing me. I thought she'd be horrified. I thought she'd call the police immediately. Instead, she looked uncomfortable. Emma, these are very serious allegations. I know, that's why I'm telling you. And you're sure about what you're saying. You're not exaggerating? Sometimes when we're upset, we can. I'm not exaggerating. It happened. She shifted in her chair. Okay, okay, I need to report this. It's mandatory. But Emma, you need to understand that there will be an investigation. People will ask you questions. And if it turns out you made this up for attention or because you're angry at your stepfather, why does everyone think I'm making this up? I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying these things are complicated, and false accusations can ruin lives. He ruined my life. Mrs. Patterson looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. I'll call Child Protective Services, she said. They'll take it from here. The CPS worker who came to our house was a tired-looking woman named Sandra. She interviewed me alone first in my room, while Richard and Mom waited downstairs. Emma, I need you to tell me exactly what happened, Sandra said, pulling out a notebook. Don't leave anything out. So I told her, again, every detail I could remember. She wrote it all down, her face expressionless. Then she went downstairs to interview Richard and Mom. I could hear voices through the floor, calm at first, then raised, then calm again. Sandra came back upstairs 20 minutes later. Emma, I've spoken with your parents. They're very concerned about you. Your stepfather denies everything you've said, and your mother confirms that she's never seen any inappropriate behavior. Is there anyone else who might have witnessed something? Any evidence? Text messages? Photos? Anything? No, he made sure we were always alone. Sandra nodded slowly. Emma, I'm going to be honest with you. Without physical evidence or witnesses, this becomes a he said, she said situation, and your stepfather has no prior record, no complaints, nothing that would indicate. So you don't believe me either? I didn't say that. But I can't remove you from the home based solely on an allegation with no supporting evidence. What I can do is recommend family therapy, and I'll be checking in regularly to. That's not good enough. It's all I can do right now. She left. Richard and Mom didn't speak to me for a week. I called the police myself, looked up the non-emergency number online, called from the school library. I need to report a sexual assault, I told the dispatcher. They sent an officer to the school, Detective James Morrison, a guy in his 40s with a receding hairline and a skeptical expression. I told him everything, again. He listened, took notes, asked detailed questions about dates and times and exactly what happened. Then he said, Emma, I'm going to be straight with you. I believe something upset you, but whether what you're describing actually happened the way you say it did, that's going to be very difficult to prove. Why doesn't anyone believe me? It's not about belief, it's about evidence. We'd need to do a medical exam, but it's been weeks since the alleged assault. We'd need witnesses, physical evidence, some kind of documentation. Do you have any of that? No. Then here's what's going to happen. I'll interview your stepfather, I'll interview your mother, I'll file a report. But unless something concrete comes up, this likely won't go anywhere. So he just gets away with it? Detective Morrison looked genuinely sympathetic. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen a lot of cases like yours. And the truth is, without evidence, these things are almost impossible to prosecute. I'm sorry. He filed the report. 2 days later, Richard threatened to sue me for defamation. That's when everything fell apart. The story got out somehow, Small town, people talk, and suddenly everyone at school knew that Emma Carter had accused her stepfather of molesting her, and most of them didn't believe me. Attention seeker, I heard someone whisper in the hallway. My mom knows her stepdad. He's like super nice. She's obviously lying. Probably mad he wouldn't let her go to some party or something. The rumors spread like wildfire. Emma Carter, the girl who cried wolf, the pathological liar trying to destroy a good man's reputation. Richard played his part perfectly. He started showing up at school events, being extra visible, extra charming. He volunteered to chaperone field trips. He donated money to the PTA. He gave this interview to the local newspaper about overcoming false allegations with grace and forgiveness. I don't blame Emma, he said in the article. She is a troubled girl going through a difficult time. I just hope she gets the help she needs. Troubled. That was the word that stuck. Everyone started using it. That troubled girl Emma. Poor Richard dealing with his troubled stepdaughter. Even my teachers looked at me differently, like I was fragile, unstable, someone to be handled carefully. I stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria, started spending time alone in the library, the bathroom, anywhere people wouldn't stare. My best friend, Jessica, stopped talking to me, just ghosted me completely. Later, I found out her parents had forbidden her from hanging out with me. Nothing personal, her mom told mine at the grocery store. We just don't think Emma is a good influence right now. I became invisible, or worse than invisible. I became the girl everyone knew, but no one wanted to know. At home, things were even worse. Richard was cold now. No more pretending to be the nice stepdad. He barely spoke to me. When he did, it was always with Mom present, always carefully worded. Emma, could you pass the salt? Emma, please clean up your mess. Always polite, always appropriate, building his case as the patient stepfather dealing with an ungrateful, lying daughter. Mom treated me like I was broken, shameful, an embarrassment. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? She said one night. Richard could lose his job over your accusations. We could lose this house. And for what? Because you wanted attention? I don't want attention. I want people to believe me. No one believes you, Emma. Don't you get that? No one. Maybe it's time you accepted that you made a mistake and moved on. I didn't make a mistake. She just shook her head like I was a lost cause. I tried to kill myself when I was 15. Not dramatically, no note or anything. I just couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't be the liar, the troubled girl, the one everyone looked at with pity or disgust. Couldn't live in that house with him, watching him act like the victim while I became the villain. I took pills, a lot of them, from the medicine cabinet. Mom found me in time, rushed me to the hospital. They pumped my stomach, kept me for 3 days in the psych ward. And you know what Richard did? He visited me, brought flowers, sat by my bed with this concerned expression, and told the nurses, she's been through so much. We just want her to get better. The psychiatrist asked me why I'd done it. I told her the truth. Because no one believes me about what my stepfather did. She wrote something in her file. Later, I found out it said, patient demonstrates persistent delusional thinking regarding stepfather, continues to make unsubstantiated allegations despite investigation finding no evidence of abuse. They diagnosed me, actually diagnosed me. Emma has been experiencing some psychological difficulties, the doctor explained to Mom and Richard. A combination of depression, possible PTSD from her father's death, and some concerning patterns of attention-seeking behavior. We recommend intensive therapy and medication. Attention-seeking behavior. They didn't believe me either. No one believed me. I spent the next 3 years in survival mode, kept my head down, took the medication they prescribed even though it made me feel like a zombie, went to therapy twice a week with Dr. Henderson, who kept trying to get me to admit that I'd made up the allegations. "Emma, healing begins with honesty," she'd say. "If you can acknowledge that you exaggerated or misunderstood what happened with Richard, we can move forward." I never acknowledged it because it wasn't true. But I stopped talking about it, stopped trying to convince anyone. I learned that fighting only made things worse, made people more certain I was unstable. So I became quiet, invisible again. The troubled girl who'd accused her stepfather and was now being treated for her delusions. Richard left me alone during those years. He'd accomplished what he wanted, destroyed my credibility so thoroughly that even if I tried to speak up again, no one would listen. I counted down the days until I turned 18 and could leave. The day after my 18th birthday, I left. I'd been planning it for months, saved every penny from my part-time job at the grocery store, applied to colleges as far away from Riverside as possible, got accepted to UC Berkeley with financial aid. I packed one bag, left a note that said simply, "I'm leaving, don't look for me," and I got on a bus. Mom called 15 times that first day. I didn't answer. Finally sent her one text, "I'm safe, I'm not coming back." She didn't respond. Richard never tried to contact me at all. Berkeley was supposed to be my fresh start, and in some ways it was. I threw myself into my studies, psychology, social work, anything that would help me understand what had happened to me and how to prevent it from happening to other kids. But trauma doesn't just disappear because you change locations. I had nightmares, panic attacks. I couldn't be touched without flinching, couldn't be alone in a room with older men without feeling my chest tighten and my palms sweat. I went through a series of therapists until I finally found Dr. Sarah Kim, who actually listened when I told her my story, who didn't try to convince me I'd imagined it or exaggerated it. "Emma," said Dr. Kim during our third session, "I believe you." I started crying, right there in her office, just sobbing, because those 3 words were the first time anyone had said them to me in 4 years. "You experienced abuse," said Dr. Kim continued, "and then you experienced a second trauma when no one believed you. That's called institutional betrayal, and it's incredibly damaging." For the first time, I had a name for what I'd gone through, validation that I wasn't crazy. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. I didn't speak to Mom for 7 years. She'd call occasionally, birthdays, holidays. I wouldn't answer. She'd leave voicemails saying she missed me, that Richard asked about me, that they hoped I was doing well. Never an apology, never an acknowledgement of what had happened, just this fake cheerfulness, like if she pretended hard enough, everything would be fine. When I was 25, I graduated with my master's in social work, started working at a nonprofit that helped children who'd experienced abuse. My first case was a 13-year-old girl who'd been molested by her mother's boyfriend. The mother didn't believe her. The police couldn't prove it. I sat across from this girl, this terrified, angry, heartbroken kid, and I understood exactly how she felt. "I believe you," I told her, "and I'm going to help you." I did help her, connected her with the right resources, built a case carefully, patiently. Eventually, we got enough evidence, other victims, medical records, testimony, to prosecute. The boyfriend went to prison. The girl looked at me after the verdict and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I cried the whole drive home that night, because I'd been her once, and no one had fought for me like I'd fought for her. That's when I started to wonder, if this man had other victims, maybe Richard did too. Maybe I wasn't the only one. I hired a private investigator, used money I'd been saving for a down payment on an apartment. Didn't care. This was more important. His name was Marcus Chen, former LAPD, specialized in cold cases. I told him everything about Richard, everything I could remember. I want to know if there are others, I said. Other girls he hurt, other accusations that were buried. Marcus didn't look skeptical like everyone else had. He just nodded. These guys usually have patterns. If he did it to you, chances are you weren't the first or the last. Let me dig. He dug for 3 months, and then he called me. Emma, you need to sit down for this. Richard Hayes wasn't just my abuser. He was a serial predator. Marcus had found 5 other girls, 5 families where Richard had been involved, sometimes as a stepdad, sometimes as a family friend, sometimes as a volunteer coach or mentor. 5 girls who'd accused him, 5 girls who'd been called liars. The pattern is identical, Marcus said, spreading files across his desk. He targets single mothers, positions himself as the perfect provider, gains access to their daughters. When the girls come forward, he's already built such a solid reputation that everyone believes him over them. How did you find them? I asked. Police reports mostly, sealed juvenile records, a couple of civil cases that went nowhere. He's careful, always moves to a new town after an accusation, changes jobs, starts fresh. But the pattern is there if you know where to look. I stared at the files. 5 faces looking back at me. Girls between 12 and 16. Different names, different towns, but the same story. The same horror. The same disbelief. Can we contact them? I asked. Some of them. 2 are adults now like you. One's still a minor but willing to talk. The other 2, he hesitated. One moved out of state and doesn't want to relive it. The other died by suicide at 17. I felt like I'd been punched. He killed her, I whispered. He destroyed her, Marcus corrected, and the system failed her, just like it failed you. I contacted the other survivors. The first one, Melissa, was 30 now. She'd been Richard's stepdaughter 15 years ago, before my mom even met him. I tried to tell, she said when we met for coffee. Her hand shook as she held her cup. I told my mom, my school, the police. No one believed me. Richard was so respected, so trustworthy. They all thought I was acting out because of my parents' divorce. What happened after you accused him? He left us, moved away, said he couldn't be part of a family that didn't trust him. And my mom blamed me, said I'd ruined everything. We haven't spoken in 10 years. The second survivor, Kara, was 28. She'd been his victim 8 years ago when he worked as a youth soccer coach. I was 14, she told me over the phone, her voice flat. He was my coach, started giving me private training sessions. Then the sessions became something else. When I finally told my parents, they confronted him. He denied everything, showed them all these character references, testimonials from other parents, made me look like a troubled kid with a crush who'd gotten rejected and lied for revenge. Did they report it? To the soccer league, yeah, but without evidence, they couldn't do anything. Richard quit coaching, moved on, and I spent years in therapy trying to convince myself I wasn't crazy. The third was Jenna, 19, still living at home with the mother who didn't believe her. He still comes to family dinners, she told me, her voice breaking, sits across from me like nothing happened, and everyone acts like I'm the problem because I can't let go of my delusions. I'm moving out as soon as I can afford to. I can't do this anymore. We had our victims. We had our pattern. Now we needed proof. Marcus and I spent 6 months building an airtight case. We compiled everything, police reports from all 5 accusations, medical records where available, testimony from therapists who'd treated the girls afterward. We tracked Richard's employment history, showing how he'd moved from town to town after each accusation. We found the pattern, the MO, the way he groomed families, built trust, isolated victims, and then destroyed their credibility when they spoke up. But we needed more. We needed something that would make it impossible for anyone to dismiss us as a group of troubled girls with false memories. That's when Marcus had an idea. What if we could get him to admit it, on tape? How? He's never going to confess. Not to you, but maybe to someone who seems sympathetic, someone who makes him think they believe him. Marcus knew a female detective who specialized in undercover operations. Her name was Rachel, and she agreed to help. The plan was simple. Rachel would approach Richard posing as a journalist writing a book about false accusations and how they destroy innocent men's lives. "I'll get him comfortable," Rachel explained. "Build rapport. Get him talking about how he was victimized by these lying girls. And hopefully, if he feels safe enough, he'll slip. They usually do." It took 3 interviews. 3 long sessions where Rachel listened to Richard paint himself as the eternal victim, the good man destroyed by ungrateful stepdaughters and troubled girls looking for attention. On the 3rd interview, she asked casually, "Did any of them ever apologize? Admit they'd been lying?" "No," Richard said, and there was something in his voice, something angry. "They never do, because they can't admit they wanted it, that they were flirting, leading me on, and then got scared and changed their story." Rachel kept her voice neutral. "They wanted it?" "Of course they did. Teenage girls, desperate for attention, daddy issues. They throw themselves at you and then act shocked when you respond. It's a game to them." "And when they accuse you afterward?" Richard laughed, actually laughed. "That's when the game gets interesting, because who are people going to believe? A respected, stable adult, or some emotional teenager with a history of lying? It's almost too easy." "Did you ever worry you'd get caught?" "No, because I'm careful. I choose the right families. Single mothers who need a provider, girls who are already isolated or troubled. Build the narrative early. By the time anything happens, everyone already thinks the girl is unreliable. And if she tries to speak up—" He shrugged. "Well, we've seen how that goes." He just confessed, on tape, to a detective. We took the recording to the district attorney, along with testimony from 5 victims, police reports spanning 15 years, expert analysis of Richard's predatory pattern, and a full timeline of his movements correlating with accusations. The DA listened to the tape, then listened again. "This is solid," she said finally. "This is prosecutable." Richard Hayes was arrested on a Tuesday. 6 counts of child molestation spanning 15 years and 4 different counties. The local news picked it up. Financial advisor arrested in historic child abuse case. My phone exploded. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in 10 years. Old classmates. "Emma, I'm so sorry we didn't believe you." Teachers. "I should have listened." Even Mrs. Patterson, my old school counselor. "I failed you. I'm sorry." But the one person I wanted to hear from, my mother, stayed silent. The trial started on a cold Monday in February. I was 30 years old. 15 years had passed since the first time I'd tried to tell someone what Richard had done to me. 15 years of being called a liar. And now, finally, people were going to hear the truth. I sat in the courtroom with Melissa, Kara, and Jenna. We'd become a strange sort of family over the past year, bound together by shared trauma and the determination to make sure Richard could never hurt anyone else. The prosecution's case was devastating. They played the recorded confession first. The courtroom went silent as Richard's voice filled the space, casual and arrogant, explaining exactly how he'd manipulated us, how he'd chosen vulnerable families, how he'd destroyed our credibility before we could even speak up. I watched the jury's faces change as they listened. Horror, disgust, anger. Then, one by one, we testified. Melissa went first. She was calm, articulate, powerful. She described what Richard had done to her 15 years ago, how her mother hadn't believed her, how she'd spent years thinking she was crazy. "I thought I was the only one," she said, her voice steady. "I thought maybe I had imagined it, or exaggerated it, or somehow caused it. That's what everyone told me. That's what I believed for years, but I didn't imagine it. It happened, and it destroyed my adolescence. Kara testified next. She was angrier, rawer. She told the jury about being 14, about trusting her coach, about the private training sessions that became assaults. He took something from me, she said, her voice breaking. My innocence, yes, but also my ability to trust, my ability to believe in myself. Because when I told the truth and no one believed me, I learned that my voice didn't matter, that what happened to me didn't matter. It took me 10 years to unlearn that lie. Jenna was the youngest and the most fragile. She cried through most of her testimony, but she got through it, describing what Richard had done to her just 4 years ago. "He's still in my life," she said through tears. "He still comes to family dinners. My mom still doesn't believe me. I see him and I want to die. But I'm here because I need people to know. I'm not lying. I never lied. He did this to me." Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. I'd prepared for this moment for months, rehearsed what I'd say. But now that I was here, looking out at the courtroom full of people, I felt 14 again. Small, voiceless, unbelievable. But then I looked at the other girls, the other survivors, and I remembered I wasn't alone anymore, and I wasn't that 14-year-old scared. I was a 30-year-old social worker who'd spent a decade helping kids like us, and it was time to use my voice. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Torres, smiled at me encouragingly. "Emma, can you tell the jury about your relationship with the defendant, Richard Hayes?" I took a deep breath. "He became my stepfather when I was 13. My mom married him 6 months after they met. At first, he seemed perfect, kind, supportive. Everything my mom needed after years of struggling as a single parent. Everything I wanted in a father figure." "When did that change?" "About 3 months after the wedding. That's when he started touching me inappropriately. It was gradual at first, a hand on my shoulder that lasted too long, comments about my appearance, standing too close. Then it escalated." "Can you describe what happened?" I described it. All of it. The night my mom worked overtime, what he did, what he said afterward. Some people in the courtroom looked away, some cried, but I kept talking because this was my truth, and I'd waited 15 years to have it heard. "What happened when you told your mother?" Janet asked. "She didn't believe me." My voice cracked, but I pushed through. "She thought I was jealous or making it up for attention. She made me apologize to Richard." "Did you go to anyone else?" "Yes, my school counselor, child protective services, the police. No one believed me. Everyone thought I was lying. Richard had already built this narrative. He was the good stepdad. I was the troubled teen. And it worked. Everyone chose him over me." "How did that affect you?" "I tried to kill myself when I was 15. The courtroom went very quiet. Because I couldn't live in a world where everyone thought I was a liar, where I had to sit across the dinner table from the man who'd assaulted me and watch him play the victim. I couldn't do it anymore. "Emma, I'm going to ask you directly. Did Richard Hayes sexually assault you?" "Yes." "Are you lying about this for attention or revenge or any other reason?" "No. I'm telling the truth. I've always been telling the truth. It just took 15 years for anyone to listen." Richard's defense attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit named David Brennan, tried to tear me apart on cross-examination. "Miss Carter, isn't it true that you've had a history of mental health issues?" "I have depression and PTSD, yes, as a direct result of being sexually abused and then having everyone tell me I was lying about it." But you were diagnosed with attention-seeking behavior, weren't you? By a psychiatrist who didn't believe I'd been abused after I tried to kill myself because no one would help me. You've also been in therapy for 15 years. Isn't it possible that your therapists planted false memories, that what you're describing never actually happened? I looked directly at him. No, because false memories don't come with the smell of his cologne, or the feeling of his hands, or the sound of his voice saying, "Who do you think they'll believe?" False memories don't cause panic attacks every time someone touches me unexpectedly. What happened to me was real. I've spent half my life trying to convince people of that, and I'm done apologizing for telling the truth. Richard's defense attorney tried a different angle. Miss Carter, isn't it true that you've contacted the other alleged victims and coordinated your testimonies? We talked, yes. Survivors often do. That doesn't make our stories any less true. In fact, the fact that we all have nearly identical experiences despite never having met before should tell you something about Richard's pattern of behavior. Or it could tell us that you've all agreed on the same false story. We didn't need to agree on anything, I said coldly, because it happened to all of us. And the reason our stories are similar is because Richard uses the same playbook every time. Target vulnerable families, build trust, groom the victim, assault, and then destroy their credibility when they try to speak up. That's not a conspiracy, that's a pattern. Brennan couldn't shake me. I'd been preparing for this moment for too long. The defense's case was weak. Richard didn't testify, too risky after the recorded confession. Instead, they called character witnesses, people who said Richard was a good man, a respected professional, someone who'd never hurt anyone. But Janet Torres destroyed each one on cross-examination. Mr. Lawson, you say Richard Hayes was a model employee. Were you aware he was fired from his position in Portland after allegations of inappropriate behavior with a client's daughter? Mrs. Chen, you describe Richard as a devoted family man. Were you aware he abandoned his stepdaughter Melissa after she accused him of molestation? Dr. Phillips, you've provided a glowing character reference. Did you know that Richard moved to 3 different cities in 5 years, each time shortly after abuse allegations were made against him? One by one, the character witnesses faltered, because the truth was, they didn't really know Richard. They knew the mask he wore. We knew the monster underneath. The prosecution's closing argument was powerful. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Janet Torres said, standing before them with quiet intensity, "this case is about a pattern, a 15-year pattern of predation, manipulation, and betrayal. Richard Hayes didn't just abuse 5 girls. He systematically destroyed their credibility, their relationships with their families, their mental health, their futures. He didn't just commit 5 assaults. He committed 5 long-term campaigns of psychological warfare against children who trusted him." She pointed to the evidence boards. "You've heard his own voice on tape, describing exactly how he did it, how he chose vulnerable families, how he built trust, how he knew that no one would believe teenage girls over a respected adult. He relied on that. He weaponized the fact that survivors of sexual abuse are often not believed. The defense wants you to think this is a conspiracy, that 5 women from different cities, different backgrounds, who never met before this case, somehow coordinated identical false accusations spanning 15 years. That's not reasonable. What's reasonable is the simplest explanation. Richard Hayes is a serial child predator who got away with it for 15 years because he was good at making his victims look like liars. You have his confession. You have consistent testimony from 5 survivors. You have expert analysis of his predatory pattern. You have documentation of him fleeing from city to city after accusations. What you don't have is any reasonable doubt that Richard Hayes is guilty. These 5 women were girls when he hurt them, girls who tried to tell the truth and were punished for it. They've carried that burden for years, some of them for over a decade. Today, you have the power to lift that burden, to tell them what they should have been told 15 years ago. We believe you. What happened to you was real, and the man who hurt you will be held accountable. On behalf of Emma, Melissa, Cara, Jenna, and every other girl Richard Hayes has hurt, I ask you to return a verdict of guilty on all counts. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Those were the longest 6 hours of my life. We waited in a victim services room, me and the other survivors, holding hands, barely speaking, just existing in this suspended state between our past trauma and our possible future justice. Finally, the call came. Verdict reached. We filed back into the courtroom. I could barely breathe. Richard Hayes sat at the defense table, his face blank. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small, powerless. The jury foreman stood. In the case of the state versus Richard Hayes on the count of child molestation in the first degree regarding victim Melissa Porter, we find the defendant guilty. I heard Melissa gasp beside me. On the count of child molestation in the first degree regarding victim Emma Carter, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty. The word I'd waited 15 years to hear. On the count of child molestation in the first degree regarding victim Cara Chen, we find the defendant guilty. Cara was crying. On the count of child molestation in the first degree regarding victim Jenna Martinez, we find the defendant guilty. Jenna squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. They read through all 6 counts, all guilty. Richard Hayes, the man who'd abused 5 girls and convinced the world we were all liars, had just been convicted on all charges. The courtroom erupted. People were crying, hugging. The judge was banging her gavel for order. I just sat there, numb, trying to process that it was over. We'd won. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Morales. She'd presided over the entire trial with stern neutrality, but now, looking down at Richard, her face showed pure disgust. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered a defendant whose crimes were so calculated, so cruel, and so devastating. You didn't just sexually abuse 5 children, you systematically destroyed their credibility, their mental health, and their relationships with their families. You weaponized society's tendency to disbelieve survivors of sexual abuse, and you did it deliberately, repeatedly, without remorse. You stole these girls' childhoods. You stole their sense of safety, their ability to trust, their belief in themselves. Some of them tried to end their lives because of what you did. One succeeded. You have left a trail of destruction that spans 15 years and multiple states." "Emma, please. Do you know what it did to me? Being called a liar by my own mother? I tried to kill myself, Mom, because I couldn't live in a world where the person who was supposed to protect me chose my abuser instead." "I'm sorry." Her voice was small. "I'm so sorry." "Are you? Or are you sorry you were wrong? Sorry that everyone knows now that you failed your daughter? Because those aren't the same thing. What do you want from me?" And that's when I realized I didn't want anything from her anymore. Not her apology, not her excuses, not her late attempt at being a mother. It was 15 years too late. "I wanted you to believe me," I said quietly. "That's all I ever wanted. But you didn't, and I've spent 15 years learning to live with that. I don't need you anymore, Mom. I have a life, a career, people who actually support me. I'm calling to tell you that I'm done. I'm done hoping you'll change or apologize properly or somehow make this right. You made your choice 15 years ago. Now I'm making mine. Emma, please don't. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years. Free. The other survivors and I stayed in touch. We'd formed a bond that trauma creates. Not friendship exactly, but something deeper. Understanding. Shared survival. Melissa started a nonprofit helping survivors of sexual abuse navigate the legal system. She asked me to join the board. I said yes. Kara went back to school to become a therapist specializing in trauma. She wanted to help other kids like us. I wrote her a recommendation letter for her graduate program application. Jenna moved out of her mother's house and cut off contact with her family. It was hard for her. She was the youngest, still processing everything, but she was brave, braver than she knew. We checked in on each other. Group texts, monthly video calls, occasional meetups. We celebrated each other's victories and supported each other through the hard days. Because there were still hard days. Justice didn't erase trauma. Richard being in prison didn't undo what he'd done to us. But it helped. God, it helped. 6 months after the trial, I got a letter. It was from a woman named Sarah. She'd seen the news coverage. She'd been Richard's stepdaughter 20 years ago, before any of us, before Melissa, the first victim. I was 11, she wrote. He did to me what he did to you. I tried to tell my mother. She didn't believe me. I tried to tell a teacher. They called my mother, and she got angry at me for spreading lies. I stopped trying. I just survived until I could leave at 18. I've never told anyone since then. I convinced myself maybe I'd misremembered. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. But watching the trial, hearing your testimonies, I realized I wasn't wrong. It happened, and I wasn't alone. Thank you, she continued. Thank you for being brave enough to keep fighting. Thank you for making sure he can't hurt anyone else. And thank you for showing me that I wasn't crazy, that it really did happen. That matters more than you know. I cried reading that letter. Because Sarah was why we'd fought so hard. She was the girl who'd never gotten justice, who'd spent 20 years thinking she was alone. She wasn't alone. None of us were. I wrote her back. We became friends. She joined our survivor group, and she started therapy for the first time in her life. I'm 43 years old. I've spent 32 years carrying this secret, thinking I was the only one, thinking I was broken. But I'm not broken. I'm a survivor, and it's time I started healing.